I, 34, female, got divorced from my husband, 36, male, around 7 months ago. We'd been married for a year when he served me, and it was really sudden. I absolutely wasn't expecting it, and I still find it really hard to believe that one day, out of the blue, he just said that he wanted to get a divorce, and that was the end of our relationship. He served me around 10 months ago, and since there's no waiting period where we live, it was relatively quick because I didn't contest the divorce either. I just didn't see any point in contesting it when it was sufficiently clear to me that he didn't want to be with me anymore. So I let him go, and even though it did hurt me, I had no other choice. The negotiations for the settlement took a while, but we did manage to split everything. I bought the house for myself, and the rest of our assets were also split equally between us. The expensive gifts that we gave each other were not mentioned, though, so we kept whatever we'd received. Once the divorce was done with, he literally disappeared. Not just from my life or metaphorically, but literally just disappeared from the city. He quit his job just a couple of weeks after the settlement was done with, from what I know, without as much as a goodbye to his friends and coworkers. He probably moved cities and even changed his phone number so that none of the people he used to know here could get to him. I couldn't figure out for the life of me why he'd go to such extreme lengths. It couldn't have been because of me, because after he served me with the divorce papers, I hardly even bothered him or spoke to him. I didn't have anything to say to him, so I didn't talk to him unless it was in the company of our lawyers. As for his friends here, they'd been relatively supportive, so I don't know why he'd suddenly cut them off as well. His friends actually had to turn to me for help when he disappeared, since they had no clue where he went or what became of him. But we had no luck trying to find him and eventually had to give up. Clearly, he didn't want to be found, which is why he'd gone so far. Anyway, I moved on with my life after that, or at least I tried to. It still didn't make any sense to me how he could just wake up one morning and not have any love in his heart for me. But what's done was done, and I couldn't go back in time to change it, so I just had to accept it, which I did with time. I didn't even try to find out if he'd been cheating or not because I just didn't see the point. All I wanted to do was move on and be done with him forever. I think I'd been able to successfully forget about him as well for a couple of weeks, but then he made his presence felt a few days back and came back to ruin my life once more. 3 days ago, at around midnight, I was just about to finish up some work and go to sleep when I suddenly heard a loud banging on our door. I couldn't imagine who would be insane enough to come visit me at this odd hour and almost thought about calling the cops. But then my ex-husband yelled out my name and I started feeling confused instead of scared. I opened the door after a few seconds and he stepped in. He looked worse for the wear and had lost a couple of pounds since I'd seen him last. I tried to greet him even though I felt really awkward, but he cut me off before I could say anything. Without wasting even a second, he asked me where I'd kept all the expensive jewelry that he'd gifted me. I was kind of surprised that he was asking about it, almost 7 months after our divorce, since he hadn't mentioned it during the settlement at all. I told him that I didn't have it, and he started looking really pissed when I said that. He told me not to mess around and just hand it all over to him because he needed it. But I told him what I'd done with his gifts and that I really didn't have them with me anymore. Over the course of our relationship, my husband and I had obviously showered each other with gifts since we'd been married for a year, and before that, we'd dated for 3 years. Both of us earned a significant amount, so expensive gifts for every occasion were our thing. I'd accumulated a bunch of really expensive jewelry over the years that he'd gifted me, worth around $30,000. I know this because I sold around $25,000 worth of jewelry and gave away the rest to charity. The reason for this was that it all reminded me of him too much and I just wanted to erase all traces of him from my life altogether. So I got rid of it all so I could have a fresh start. I don't think I did anything wrong, but my ex-husband was furious when I told him what I'd done. He called me a gold digger and demanded that I get it all back somehow or give him the money. Now, I don't think that's fair at all because I gave him several expensive watches as well. Not just watches, but for our first marriage anniversary, I gifted him the car that he's been driving ever since then. I didn't ask for any of it to be returned to me, or even that I be compensated for it, so I don't think he has the right to ask me to return anything either. I'm not a gold digger, that's for sure, since I gave him just as much as he gave me, if not more. I told him all of this, but he wasn't ready to listen and said that he wasn't going to leave me alone until I returned everything to him. I couldn't believe that he was being so stupid because obviously I wasn't giving anything back to him. Even if I could, I wouldn't. Back when we were negotiating, he could have asked for all his gifts to be returned and I would have been obliged to do it, as would he. But he didn't choose to speak up then and get it all done legally, and now I'm not obliged to do anything for him. He left that night but hasn't stopped bothering me since and keeps texting me to remind me that I need to give it all back. I don't think I did anything wrong, and I'm not feeling very inclined to compensate him for all that he'd given me. So AITA for selling off all the jewelry that my ex-husband had gifted me while we were together? Update 1. So it's been a week since my ex-husband came back, and like I mentioned already, he'd been bothering me every day after that night. I got extremely pissed off yesterday and finally agreed to meet him to discuss certain things because I just couldn't take his ridiculous demands anymore and had to put an end to it all. So we met at a restaurant because I really didn't want him inside my house. I guess in hindsight, I should have guessed that was a bad decision since he ended up throwing a temper tantrum in the restaurant itself and embarrassed me in front of a bunch of strangers. Anyway, when we met, I told him right off the bat that I would be willing to work out an arrangement where I compensate him with the money, but he also had to return all the gifts I gave him, including his car. When I said that, he even had the audacity to look shocked. I mean, I don't even understand why he'd expect me to just hand over such a huge amount of money to him without expecting anything in return. I guess he's forgotten that we're not still married and I don't owe him anything. He told me that he'd sold off all the watches and other gifts, and as for the car, he currently uses it, so obviously he can't give it back to me. As far as I was concerned, that was the end of the discussion for me because if he had nothing to give me, then I didn't owe him anything either, fair and square. But he sat me down and argued with me for several more minutes about how he needed the money more than I did because he'd had to move cities and his new job didn't pay half as well. I don't understand how that was any of my concern or fault because I never told him to move. I'd kept to myself after the divorce and hadn't said a word to him. So I told him that while I was sorry that he was going through tough times, my condolences were all that I could offer him because I really wasn't going to give him anything else. Once again, I reminded him that he should have brought all of this up when we were negotiating during the divorce, but he didn't, so that really wasn't any problem anymore. At that point, he slammed his fist on the table out of frustration, and that earned us several concerned looks. I told him not to make a scene out here, but yet again, he wasn't going to listen to me and started yelling at me. He told me that I was being selfish and I couldn't just do this to him after so many years of being together. That made me laugh at the sheer ridiculousness of it because obviously he was the one who'd thrown away all those years of being together. I hadn't. And now he was the one bringing it up to try and manipulate me into giving him my money just because he needed it. Well, back when we were getting divorced, I needed some time to process it and come to terms with it as well, but he didn't give me that. Hell, he didn't even give me a second chance, so why on earth would I be so considerate of what he needs right now. He kept yelling at me in front of all the people while I tried to quiet him down, but eventually the restaurant manager had to come over to our table and had to request us to leave. I didn't blame the guy because who even would want such a nutcase in their midst? I paid for the salad that I'd ordered, apologized, and left while my ex-husband yelled at the manager. I tried to slip out and drive away as soon as I could, but unfortunately he probably noticed what I was trying to do and stopped me before I could enter my car. I was getting really impatient because this was an off day that I was wasting on him and his antics, and I just wanted to get home, drink some wine, and watch Netflix, but he was the only thing standing in my way. I told him to make it quick, and even that offended him and set him off. He started telling me that this was really important to him and that my treating this whole situation like this was really offensive. By then, I was pretty much done with him and told him that it didn't matter to me and I just wanted to get away from him. We weren't married anymore, so he was as good as a stranger to me. I didn't owe him anything anymore. Not my time and definitely not my money, so he should just be grateful I even agreed to meet him. After that, I didn't give him the chance to speak anymore and got into my car while he fumbled for words and then drove away as fast as I could. I hope he takes the hint now and doesn't bother me anymore. Update 2. I'd thought that my last update would be the end of this whole situation with my ex-husband, but clearly not. I'm back again now, just 3 days after my last update. This time, thankfully, I didn't have to interact with my husband directly, but with my in-laws instead. So here's the thing. My in-laws also blocked me everywhere as soon as my husband told me he wanted to get a divorce, which was quite a shock to me, especially when I realized my sister-in-law had blocked me as well because we'd been pretty good friends. I hadn't minded it back then because, needless to say, no matter how friendly we were, she'd obviously still chose her brother's side over me, and I was pretty sure that it was my ex-husband who told them all to block me. I tried not to take it to heart, but it did sting a little, especially the fact that even my sister-in-law didn't try to keep in touch, but whatever. I hadn't spoken to them since back then, but a couple of hours ago, my sister-in-law called me out of the blue, and when I answered her call, I was a little surprised because I wasn't expecting her to get back in touch with me ever again. After some small talk, she got to the point and told me that her brother was back because he needed all the help he could get, and that she would really appreciate it if I gave him the money that I'd received from selling off his gifts. I thought that it was really low on my ex-husband's part to get his sister involved just so that he could get some money out of me, but nevertheless I tried to keep my calm and told my sister-in-law the same thing that I told my ex-husband. I explained it all really calmly and politely and expected her to understand, but she didn't. Duh. She was her brother's sister, in spite of the friendship that we'd had in the past. So she went on to argue with me and even said that if I'd been in my ex-husband's position, then he would have helped me out without batting an eye. I didn't see the point of saying something as asinine as that because I think everyone who knows my husband would say quite the opposite. He's not the helpful kind and definitely not the selfless kind, so I knew that my sister-in-law was just saying things to emotionally manipulate me, but it wasn't going to work. I'm not that stupid or soft. I still kept my cool and told her that I wasn't going to change my mind, and then even she snapped at me. She called me a bunch of names and told me that she regretted ever being friends with me since I clearly wasn't worthy of it. That really got to me and I shot back, saying that neither was her brother worth marrying, but here we were. I hung up after that and blocked her number. I'm still fuming because this is just the limit. He can't just go on bothering me like this for money, especially when I've made my terms sufficiently clear. If he can't live up to that, then that's his problem entirely. He has no right to harass me right now, especially after he disappeared on me for months and didn't even bother to explain anything. And while I don't want to admit it, I am kind of curious as to know what exactly he was up to all these months. As far as I know, he was never the kind of person to take an interest in traveling or anything of the sort, so I'm sure he wasn't away finding himself in nature or whatever. Plus, 7 months is a long time to be away, and if he's managed to run into financial trouble, then there must be something really fishy going on. His line of work pays really well, so even if he's at a job that pays less, it's still enough for one person to live off, which is why it's really suspicious that he's so desperate for some extra money. I'm sure there's something that all of them are hiding from me, not just right now, but have been hiding from the very beginning, but I didn't bother to get to the bottom of it earlier. Obviously, I can't ask them what it is, so I'll just have to either wait for him to come clean or hope that by some miracle I'm able to find out on my own. Both of these options seem really unlikely to happen, but oh well, one can only hope. Update 3. Hey, so it's been around 4 days since my sister-in-law called me, and today, once again, I received a text from my husband. He's pretty desperate, I think, since he messaged me at 4 in the morning, requesting me to meet him one last time and hear his side of the story before I decide anything. I'm kind of conflicted because while I absolutely do not want to see him again and have him throw a tantrum once more, I also do want to know what's going on and what's made him so desperate for money at this point. I don't know what to do. I'm really lost, so I haven't responded to his text yet, which is why he keeps texting me again and again, requesting me to meet him, but I honestly just don't know what to tell him. Maybe I'll agree to it, just for the heck of it. Update 4. So, I just came back home from meeting with my husband, and oh man, I'm so happy that I decided to meet him today and get to the bottom of this whole thing. I'm still finding it hard to believe the things he told me, but maybe venting here is going to help me realize that this isn't just some bad dream. So, back when he'd initially asked me for a divorce and had refused to give me a reason apart from the fact that he just wasn't in love with me anymore, I had thought that maybe he'd been cheating, but he denied it several times and had even let go through his texts and calls to ensure that he was telling me the truth. I didn't have any proof to think otherwise, so I just took his word for it, but it kept bugging me, and I'd never truly believed that he wasn't actually cheating on me. With time, though, I'd been able to drive all those doubts away from my mind, but today, my worst fears were confirmed because, as it turns out, I'd been played for a fool, and my ex-husband had indeed been cheating. He'd started having feelings for one of his classmates back when they'd met at high school reunion just 6 months into our marriage, and that's when he'd started an extramarital affair with her. So everything beyond that point was a lie, and I almost threw up when he confessed. He'd eventually moved to a new city with her, and they'd taken up living on a farm, which had been a terrible decision because, duh, none of them knew the first thing about farming. It wasn't the romantic escapade they'd been looking for, so they ended up having to hire someone who knew what he was doing to take care of their business. On top of that, his girlfriend also found out that she was pregnant a couple of months ago, but they just didn't have enough money to raise a child anymore. Farming was clearly not their cup of tea, and they still needed some time to make profits, and they'd already burned through their savings, so as a last resort, he came running back to me to ask for the gifts he'd given me. I was in shock when he told me all of this because it was all so surreal. I'd gone to the hotel he'd been living in, and we'd been talking in his room, but as soon as he finished his story and asked me to be considerate, I got up and left without a word. I still couldn't process what he'd told me while I walked back to my car, and even as I drove back home, I struggled to make sense of it all. I couldn't believe that he'd had the audacity to cheat on me and then come running back to me for help because he'd knocked up the woman he'd been cheating on me with. Worst of all, I couldn't believe I'd ever fallen for his act and believed that he'd ever loved me. For our 1 year anniversary, I'd bought him a freaking car while he'd been cheating on me with that other woman, and even that didn't stop him from running away with her. I was disgusted by him and blocked him as soon as I came back home. So far, I hadn't done that because deep down, I still had a soft spot for him, but that was all gone now. He didn't deserve any of my kindness or sympathy. He had tried to call me back when I was walking out of his hotel room, but I didn't look back. And he didn't chase me down, so I guess that was that. Maybe he'll realize that I'm done with him and not bother me again, but honestly, given how shameless he is, I don't think that's going to happen. I'm pretty sure he'll try one last time to get some money out of me. Update 5. I was right. He did come back. Today he showed up at my house and I let him in because I was going to let him have it from me today and then kick him out for good. He had the audacity to even say that last time we met, he didn't chase me down because he wanted me to take my time. Like, wow, thanks for the huge favor, I guess. Anyway, I didn't waste much time and told him that I hadn't changed my mind. And if anything, his story had just convinced me even more to not help him out under any circumstances. I told him that I didn't even understand how he found it in himself to come crawling back to me for money after he'd been cheating on me for so long. I think I must have ranted for 10 minutes and even called him a bunch of names that he'd called me that other day back in the restaurant. Except that this time, I was completely right. He was indeed a selfish gold digger with no regard for anyone else's feelings except his own. And it served him right that he was now struggling with money. This was just his own karma because what goes around comes around. So he shouldn't expect any help at all from the person he screwed over. He opened his mouth to argue, but I told him that I wasn't going to let him disrespect me and argue with me anymore, and that he needed to leave immediately, or else I really would call the cops and report him. He tried to say that I was bluffing, but then I actually grabbed my phone and screamed at him to get the hell out. I must have looked pretty hysterical since that's how I felt, and he ended up leaving, looking scared but still cursing at me. It didn't make a difference to me anymore, though. He was gone, and that's all that mattered to me. I'm finally just done with this a-hole and never have to deal with him ever again, which actually does call for a celebration, so maybe I'll get some wine today and celebrate my independence now. Stay tuned for more stories from Our Girl Relationships.